Lieutenant Commander Alex Harper had mastered the art of invisible observation during his 3 months aboard the interstellar research vessel Aurora. As the ship's communications specialist, his duties required him to monitor information flow between the diverse crew members while maintaining the professional distance that prevented personal relationships from interfering with operational effectiveness. It was a skill that served him well in most circumstances, allowing him to study the complex social dynamics of interspecies cooperation without becoming entangled in the interpersonal complications that could compromise his work. It was a skill that had completely failed him when it came to Dr. Kira Solanas. The xenolinguist possessed the kind of ethereal beauty that made Etherians legendary throughout human space. Luminescent skin markings that shifted with her emotional states, silver hair that seemed to capture and reflect light from impossible angles, and pointed ears that moved with subtle expressions of attention and interest. But it wasn't just her physical appearance that had captured Alex's attention during their brief professional interactions. Kira moved through the ship's corridors with fluid grace that suggested perfect spatial awareness, engaged in conversations with the kind of focused intelligence that elevated every discussion she joined, and treated everyone from senior officers to junior technicians with equal courtesy and genuine interest in their perspectives. Alex had been watching her from across the main corridor during shift change, noting the way she listened to Dr. Martinez's explanation of the latest archaeological findings with the same intense attention she brought to everything, when the words slipped out before his conscious mind could prevent them. "She's the most beautiful I've ever seen," he whispered, so quietly that he was certain the ambient noise of crew movement and ship operations would render his comment inaudible to anyone more than arm's length away. Kira paused mid-step. Alex felt his stomach drop toward his boots as he realized that Etherian hearing was considerably more acute than human auditory capabilities, and that his supposedly private observation had been delivered with perfect clarity to exactly the person he'd hoped would never know about his unprofessional admiration. Dr. Martinez continued talking, apparently unaware that his audience's attention had shifted, but Kira's head tilted with the kind of subtle movement that suggested she was processing auditory information from multiple sources. Her luminescent markings flickered through patterns that Alex didn't recognize from his basic xenobiology training, though their rapid changes suggested complex emotional responses to whatever she had heard. Slowly, deliberately, Kira turned to face him. Alex stood frozen in the corridor, his tablet forgotten in his hands as he met eyes that held depths he'd only observed from a distance. Kira's expression was unreadable, not hostile, but not welcoming either. Simply evaluative. As if she was seeing him for the first time despite their previous professional interactions during briefings and shift rotations. The silence between them stretched through what felt like several geological epochs while other crew members continued their conversations and corridor traffic flowed around them. Alex's enhanced pattern recognition training, so useful for analyzing communication protocols and data transmission efficiency, offered no guidance for interpreting the way Kira was studying his face, or the significance of the luminescent patterns now pulsing steadily beneath her skin. Dar. Solanas, Alex managed, his voice carrying none of the calm professionalism that characterized his usual interactions with senior research staff. I didn't realize you were. That I could hear you. Kira interrupted softly, her accent adding musical undertones to standard that made even simple questions sound like poetry. Etherian auditory sensitivity extends well beyond human hearing ranges, Lieutenant Commander Harper. She knew his name. Alex felt heat rising in his cheeks as he realized that not only had his private comment been overheard, but that Kira was aware of his identity despite their limited direct interaction during his time aboard the Aurora. The implications, that she had been paying enough attention to crew members to learn his name and rank, suggested either exceptional professional thoroughness or personal interest that he had never suspected. "I apologize," Alex said, falling back on formal protocols when personal communication strategies proved inadequate. "My comment was inappropriate and unprofessional. It won't happen again." Kira's luminescent markings shifted to new patterns, and Alex caught the hint of a smile that transformed her ethereal beauty into something warmer and more immediately accessible. "Inappropriate and unprofessional," she repeated thoughtfully. "Is that how you categorize honest appreciation for aesthetic beauty?" Alex stopped, recognizing that his attempt at professional damage control might be creating larger problems than his original inadvertent comment. I don't know. I've never had to categorize accidentally voicing private thoughts about colleagues before. Colleague, Kira said, testing the word as if it carried implications she was still processing. Is that how you see me, Lieutenant Commander? As a colleague whose aesthetic properties you evaluate during routine corridor observations? Alex felt the conversation sliding away from any framework he understood, but something in Kira's tone suggested that honest confusion might be safer than continued attempts at diplomatic evasion. Dr. Solanas, I see you as someone whose intelligence and professional competence I respect greatly, and whose personal qualities I find remarkably attractive in ways that I've been careful not to let affect our professional interactions. Personal qualities, she repeated, her luminescent markings brightening with what might have been amusement. Such as the way you listen to people with complete attention regardless of their rank or species, the way you move through complex social situations with grace that makes everyone around you feel more comfortable, and yes, the way your presence seems to make everything around you more beautiful just by existing in the same space. Alex realized he was sharing thoughts that he'd never articulated even to himself, but Kira's expression had shifted to something that looked like genuine interest rather than polite tolerance for unwanted attention from a junior officer. And you've been observing these personal qualities for how long? She asked. Since my first week aboard the Aurora, Alex admitted, abandoning any pretense that his interest had been casual or recent. But I've been careful to maintain appropriate professional distance because I assumed that someone with your expertise and social position wouldn't be interested in personal conversation with someone like me. Someone like you, Kira said, moving closer with steps that brought her within normal conversational distance while somehow making the corridor seem more private despite the ongoing crew traffic around them. Meaning a communications technician whose primary social skills involve talking to computers and managing information flow rather than conducting important research or contributing to scientific discoveries that advance human understanding of the galaxy. Kira was quiet for a moment, her luminescent markings cycling through patterns that suggested complex thought processes. When she finally responded, her voice carried something that sounded like understanding mixed with what might have been gentle correction. Alex, she said, using his given name for the first time, may I ask you something about human social behavior that has puzzled me during my time aboard this ship? Of course. Why do humans assume that professional competence in one area indicates lack of interest in personal qualities that exist completely separate from work-related capabilities? Alex blinked, processing the question's implications while trying to understand what aspect of his assumptions she was challenging. I'm not sure I understand what you're asking. I'm asking, Kira said, her smile becoming more pronounced, whether you think that my work as a xenolinguist somehow prevents me from noticing when someone observes me with obvious appreciation, or whether you believe that professional expertise makes people immune to curiosity about colleagues who treat them with consistent respect and genuine interest. The revelation that Kira had been aware of his attention, and possibly had questions of her own about his behavior, recontextualized every interaction they'd shared during his time aboard the ship. Alex felt his understanding of their relationship shifting as he realized that his careful professional distance might have been as obvious to her as her effect on him had been to anyone paying attention to his behavior during briefings. You've noticed, he said, the statement carrying implications that made his chest feel tight with possibilities he'd never allowed himself to consider. I've noticed, Kira confirmed, her luminescent markings settling into steady patterns that somehow made her appearance even more striking. And I've been curious about why someone who clearly finds me interesting has been so determined to avoid direct conversation. Alex looked at the woman whose accidental hearing of his private comment had led to the most meaningful personal conversation he'd experienced since joining the Aurora's crew, and realized that his assumptions about professional boundaries and social hierarchies might have been preventing exactly the kind of connection he'd been hoping to develop. Dr. Solanas, he said carefully, would you be interested in continuing this conversation somewhere with fewer potential interruptions? Because I think I have several months of assumptions to reconsider, and you might have questions about human social behavior that require more detailed explanation than corridor encounters typically allow. I would be very interested in that conversation, Kira replied, her smile brightening her luminescent markings in ways that made Alex understand why Etherean beauty was considered legendary throughout human space. And Alex? My comment about human assumptions works both ways. You might be surprised by what you discover when you stop assuming you know what other people are thinking about you. As they made plans to meet after their shifts ended, Alex reflected on how his whispered observation had transformed from embarrassing professional mistake into the beginning of something that felt far more significant than he'd ever imagined possible when he'd first noticed the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen walking through the corridors of an interstellar research vessel. 2 hours after his accidental confession in the corridor, Alex stood outside Dr. Solanas' quarters with the kind of nervous energy that reminded him why he preferred communicating through technical systems rather than face-to-face conversations that required real-time emotional navigation. The intervening time had given him plenty of opportunity to reconsider the wisdom of accepting her invitation, but also enough space to realize that avoiding the conversation would leave him wondering forever about possibilities he'd never been brave enough to explore. When Kira opened the door, she had changed from her standard research attire into casual clothing that somehow made her appear both more relaxed and more approachable, though her luminescent markings continued to shift through patterns that suggested ongoing complex emotional processing. "Alex," she said, stepping aside to allow him entry into quarters that reflected the same attention to aesthetic harmony that characterized everything about her presence aboard the ship. "Thank you for accepting my invitation. Please, make yourself comfortable." Her quarters were larger than his own, reflecting her senior research position, but arranged with the kind of thoughtful efficiency that suggested someone who valued both functionality and beauty in her personal environment. Books, research tablets, and what appeared to be examples of artistic work from various alien cultures created an atmosphere that felt more like a scholar's study than standard ship accommodations. "Your collection is impressive," Alex said, noting linguistic references and cultural artifacts that represented species he recognized from communication protocols but had never studied in detail. "Do you acquire these during research missions, or?" "Some from missions, some from colleagues, some from personal travel before I joined Starfleet," Kira replied, settling into a chair that positioned her where the room's lighting enhanced rather than obscured her luminescent markings. "Each piece represents a different approach to expressing ideas that transcend verbal communication. I find them useful for understanding how different species conceptualize beauty, meaning, and connection." Alex chose a seat that maintained respectful distance while allowing comfortable conversation, though he noticed that Kira's arrangement of furniture seemed designed to facilitate the kind of intimate discussion that his professional caution usually avoided. "Is that what you wanted to discuss?" he asked. "Interspecies concepts of beauty and connection?" "Among other things," Kira said, her smile suggesting that the evening's conversation would cover territory that neither of them had fully mapped in advance. "But first, I want to apologize for putting you on the spot in the corridor. Your comment was clearly meant to be private, and my response might have created professional awkwardness that you didn't expect when you made an observation you assumed no one would overhear." "You don't need to apologize for having better hearing than I accounted for," Alex replied. "And honestly, the professional awkwardness was probably overdue. I've been pretending that my interest in your work was purely academic for 3 months, when the truth is that I've been hoping for an excuse to have exactly this kind of personal conversation." Kira's luminescent markings brightened with what Alex was beginning to recognize as pleasure mixed with curiosity. "So your respectful professional distance wasn't because you found me intimidating or uninteresting?" "Dr. Solanas, Kira. You're one of the most accomplished xenolinguists in Starfleet. Your research on communication theory has influenced policy decisions that affect interspecies relations throughout the Federation, and you navigate complex social situations with the kind of natural grace that makes everyone around you feel more intelligent just by association." Alex paused, realizing he was sharing assessments he'd never articulated even to himself. "Intimidating doesn't begin to cover how I felt about approaching someone whose professional achievements make my communication protocols expertise seem like a hobby by comparison." "And yet," Kira said gently, "you just described my professional accomplishments while completely avoiding any mention of the personal qualities that prompted your corridor observation. Do you think that my career achievements somehow separate me from normal social interests and emotional responses?" Alex considered her question while studying the way her luminescent markings had shifted to patterns that suggested she was genuinely curious about his perspective rather than challenging his assumptions for purely conversational purposes. "I think," he said slowly, "that I've been using your professional status as an excuse to avoid risking personal rejection by assuming that someone with your capabilities wouldn't be interested in someone whose primary contribution to ship operations involves making sure the communication systems don't crash during critical missions." "Ah," Kira said, leaning forward with the kind of focused attention that made her professional conversations so engaging. "And where did you develop the assumption that professional competence in technical systems indicates lack of value as a potential personal partner?" "Probably from spending most of my career working with people who were more interested in what I could do for their projects than who I was as a person," Alex admitted. "It's easier to assume that someone like you operates according to similar priorities than to risk discovering whether your interest in people extends beyond their professional utility." Kira was quiet for a moment, her luminescent markings cycling through patterns that seemed to reflect complex thought processes. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the kind of gentle honesty that characterized her best research discussions. "Alex, may I share something about Etherian psychology that might help you understand why your assumptions about my interests have been inaccurate?" "Please." Etherian emotional sensitivity means that we experience other people's feelings as direct sensory input rather than interpreted social cues. When I interact with colleagues who are primarily interested in my professional capabilities, I can literally sense their emotional focus on what I can provide rather than who I am. Kira paused, her expression growing more thoughtful. "Your emotional signature has always been different. When you look at me, when you listen during briefings, when you respond to my questions, your interest feels personal rather than transactional." Alex felt his understanding of their previous interactions shifting as he processed the implications of enhanced Etherian empathy. "You could sense that I was interested in you personally, not just professionally. I could sense that your attention felt warmer, more complex. Like you were seeing a complete person rather than just a collection of useful skills." Kira's smile carried warmth that made her luminescent markings glow with steady contentment. "It was refreshing enough that I began paying attention to you as well, trying to understand why your emotional presence felt so different from most of the people I work with." "And what did you conclude about my emotional presence?" "That you're someone who notices details that other people miss, who treats everyone with consistent courtesy regardless of their rank or species, and who seems genuinely interested in understanding rather than simply utilizing the people around you." Kira's luminescent markings brightened as she continued. "Also, that you have excellent taste in aesthetic appreciation, based on your corridor observation this afternoon." Alex felt heat rising in his cheeks again, though Kira's tone suggested gentle teasing rather than criticism. "So when I accidentally said you were the most beautiful I'd ever seen, you confirmed what I'd suspected about your personal interest, while also demonstrating the kind of honest emotional expression that Etherian culture values highly in potential partners." "Potential partners?" Alex repeated, his heart rate increasing as he processed the implications of her phrasing. "Alex," Kira said, her voice taking on the kind of serious tone that indicated important information, "I asked you here tonight because 3 months of professional interaction and enhanced empathic observation have convinced me that you're someone worth getting to know better on a personal level. Your accidental confession simply provided the opportunity for a conversation I've been hoping to have." Alex stared at the woman whose overheard comment had revealed months of mutual interest that both of them had been too cautious to acknowledge directly. "You've been interested in me personally for months?" "I've been curious about the person whose emotional warmth felt so different from typical professional relationships, and increasingly convinced that getting to know that person better might lead to something more meaningful than colleague interactions." Kira's luminescent markings settled into patterns that seemed to convey both confidence and hopeful anticipation. "The question is whether you're interested in discovering what might develop between us if we stopped maintaining careful professional distance." Alex looked at Kira, really looked at her, not as a respected colleague he admired from afar, but as someone who had just indicated genuine personal interest in building a relationship that went beyond their work aboard the Aurora. Her beauty was still breathtaking, but now it was complemented by the knowledge that her interest in him was based on months of careful observation and genuine appreciation for qualities he'd never been certain anyone noticed. I'm very interested in that discovery, he said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded despite the magnitude of what they were discussing. Though I should probably warn you that my experience with personal relationships is considerably less extensive than my expertise with communication protocols. And I should warn you that Etherian emotional sensitivity can make personal relationships intense in ways that human psychology isn't necessarily prepared for, Kira replied. But if we're both willing to learn as we go, I think we might find that our different approaches to understanding people complement each other well. Different how? You observe social behavior with the kind of analytical precision that helps you understand complex patterns without being overwhelmed by emotional input, Kira explained. I experience emotional states directly but sometimes miss the logical frameworks that explain why people behave the way they do. Together, we might develop unusually complete understanding of the people and situations we encounter. Alex smiled, beginning to see how their personal relationship might enhance rather than complicate their professional effectiveness. So you're proposing a partnership based on complementary analytical capabilities as well as personal attraction? I'm proposing that we see where honest curiosity about each other leads, while acknowledging that the best relationships combine intellectual compatibility with genuine emotional connection. Kira's luminescent markings brightened with obvious pleasure. Though I should mention that your corridor observation about my beauty was quite flattering, even if it was accidentally public. It was also completely accurate, Alex replied, feeling more confident as their conversation revealed the foundation for something that could develop into exactly the kind of meaningful relationship he'd always hoped to find. And I'm glad my careless whisper led to this conversation, even if the circumstances weren't exactly what I would have planned. Sometimes, Kira said, the best relationships begin with honest accidents that reveal feelings we didn't realize were ready to be shared. As they continued talking through the evening, Alex realized that his whispered appreciation for Kira's beauty had indeed been the beginning of something that would change everything, not because of the words themselves, but because they had created the opportunity for two people to discover that their careful professional distance had been protecting them from exactly the kind of connection they both wanted to explore. 3 weeks after their first personal conversation, Alex discovered that dating an Etherian xenolinguist involved considerably more complexity than his previous relationships, though the challenges were offset by rewards that made every difficulty worth navigating. Kira's enhanced empathy meant that she could detect his emotional states with accuracy that eliminated the guesswork typically involved in understanding a partner's feelings, but it also meant that his stress about work, concern for her welfare, and excitement about their developing relationship created sensory input that could overwhelm her during busy periods. Alex, Kira said during one of their regular evening meetings in her quarters, I need to explain something about Etherian psychology that might help you understand why I sometimes seem to withdraw during our conversations. I've noticed that you need breaks when the ship gets crowded or when there's tension during briefings, Alex replied, setting aside the research tablet he'd been sharing with her. Is it related to your empathic sensitivity? Exactly. Etherian nervous systems process emotional input from everyone within a certain radius, which can be manageable in small groups but overwhelming when dealing with the complex social dynamics of a ship this size. Kira's luminescent markings shifted to patterns that Alex had learned indicated fatigue mixed with appreciation. Your emotional presence is actually calming for me, which is one of the reasons I was drawn to you initially, but I wanted you to understand that when I need solitude, it's not personal rejection, it's physiological necessity. Like needing quiet after spending time in a noisy environment. Very much like that. Except the noise is emotional rather than auditory, and it accumulates over time until I need to process it in isolation. Alex studied her expression, noting the way her luminescent markings had settled into steadier patterns during their conversation. Is talking with me right now adding to that emotional noise, or helping you process it? Helping, Kira said with a smile that brightened her markings considerably. Your emotional signature is remarkably stable and peaceful, which provides a kind of baseline that makes it easier for me to sort through the complex input I receive from other crew members. So I function as emotional white noise that helps you filter other signals. More like emotional classical music that provides structure and harmony while I'm processing chaotic input, Kira corrected with gentle humor. Though I suppose the analogy works either way, you help create an environment where I can function more effectively. Their relationship had developed with the kind of careful attention to compatibility that characterized both their professional approaches to complex problems. Alex had learned to recognize the signs of Kira's empathic overload and adjust his own emotional output accordingly, while Kira had begun teaching him to interpret the subtle social cues that her enhanced sensitivity detected in their colleagues' behavior. Speaking of emotional input, Alex said, "I've been noticing that Lieutenant Morrison has been unusually tense during communications briefings. Is that something your empathic abilities can provide insight into?" "Morrison is concerned about family issues that he hasn't shared with anyone officially," Kira replied. "His emotional signature suggests anxiety about people he cares about, but not about his professional responsibilities. If you want to help without overstepping personal boundaries, you might create opportunities for him to discuss non-work topics during less formal interactions." This kind of collaborative analysis had become a regular feature of their evening conversations, with Kira's empathic insights combining with Alex's observational skills to create unusually complete understanding of the social dynamics affecting their colleagues' work performance and personal welfare. "Kira," Alex said, "do you think our different approaches to understanding people might be professionally valuable beyond just helping us navigate personal relationships?" "I've been wondering about that myself," she replied. "Your technical communication expertise combined with my linguistic and empathic capabilities could potentially improve our effectiveness in first contact situations or diplomatic negotiations. Have you considered proposing collaboration on research projects that would utilize both skill sets?" "I've been hoping you would suggest that," Kira said, her luminescent markings brightening with obvious excitement. "There's a xenolinguistic analysis project involving communication patterns from the Deltan species that could benefit enormously from someone with your systematic approach to information processing." Their discussion of professional collaboration was interrupted by the ship's communication system announcing a priority briefing for senior research staff and department heads. Alex's position as communications specialist qualified him for attendance, while Kira's role as chief xenolinguist made her participation essential. "Interesting timing," Alex observed as they prepared to attend the briefing together for the first time since their relationship had moved beyond careful professional distance. "Hopefully not too interesting," Kira replied. "Crisis situations tend to produce exactly the kind of complex emotional chaos that makes my empathic abilities more liability than asset." The briefing concerned the Aurora's assignment to investigate communication signals from an apparently uninhabited system, signals that displayed characteristics suggesting possible intelligence despite the lack of detectable technological infrastructure. Captain Rodriguez explained that standard first contact protocols would be modified to emphasize communication analysis over physical investigation, making the mission particularly dependent on linguistic and technical expertise. "Dr. Solanas," the captain said, "I want your assessment of the communication patterns we've detected, with particular focus on whether they represent natural phenomena or indicate the presence of intelligence that we haven't learned to recognize." "Commander Harper," she continued, "I need analysis of the technical characteristics of these signals. Frequency patterns, transmission methods, and any other data that might help us understand how to respond appropriately if they do represent attempts at communication." Alex felt excitement building as he realized that the mission would require exactly the kind of collaborative analysis that he and Kira had been developing during their personal conversations, but applied to potentially historic first contact situations. "Captain," Alex said, "Dr. Solanas and I have been working on integrated approaches to communication analysis that combine technical signal processing with linguistic pattern recognition. If you're amenable to collaborative analysis, we might be able to provide more comprehensive assessment than either of us could produce independently." "Explain," Captain Rodriguez said, her attention focusing with the kind of intensity that indicated genuine interest in operational improvements. Kira stepped forward, her luminescent markings shifting to patterns that Alex recognized as professional confidence mixed with personal pride. "Commander Harper's systematic approach to information analysis provides framework for understanding signal characteristics that my linguistic training alone might miss, while my empathic sensitivity can detect emotional or intentional content in communication patterns that purely technical analysis might overlook. You're proposing joint analysis based on complementary expertise. We're proposing that the combination of technical precision and empathic interpretation might provide insights that neither approach could achieve alone," Alex confirmed. Particularly in situations where we're dealing with intelligence that doesn't conform to known patterns of communication technology. Captain Rodriguez studied them both for a moment, then nodded approvingly. Approved. You'll work as a team on this analysis, with joint responsibility for providing recommendations about contact protocols. Dr. Martinez will coordinate archaeological investigation of the system while you two focus on understanding whatever intelligence might be producing these signals. As the briefing concluded and crew members began dispersing to their respective preparation duties, Alex found himself walking beside Kira through corridors that had once been the setting for his careful professional distance and her curious observation of his behavior. "Well," Kira said, her luminescent markings glowing with contentment mixed with anticipation, "it appears that our personal relationship is about to be tested by professional collaboration under potentially historic circumstances. Any concerns about working so closely together while we're still figuring out personal relationship dynamics?" "Only that success in this mission might prove that we function even better as professional partners than we do as personal ones," Kira replied with a smile. "Which would be both wonderful for our careers and potentially intimidating for our relationship development. Or," Alex suggested, "it might prove that the best partnerships combine personal compatibility with professional effectiveness, and that our relationship has been developing in exactly the right direction from the beginning." As they prepared for a mission that would test both their individual capabilities and their collaborative potential, Alex reflected on how his whispered observation about Kira's beauty had led not only to personal relationship but to professional partnership that might influence humanity's approach to interspecies communication for generations to come. The most beautiful woman he'd ever seen had indeed changed everything, but in ways that extended far beyond the romantic possibilities he'd never dared to imagine when he'd first noticed her walking through the corridors of an interstellar research vessel. 6 months after his whispered confession in the corridor, Alex stood beside Kira in the Aurora's main communication center, watching data streams that represented humanity's first successful translation of the quantum harmonic language used by the resonance. A species whose existence had been theoretical until their collaborative analysis had proven that the mysterious signals originated from beings who existed partially outside normal spacetime dimensions. "The pattern recognition algorithms are stabilizing," Alex reported, his hands moving across control interfaces with the practiced efficiency that months of working with Kira had refined into seamless coordination. "We're maintaining coherent translation matrices for approximately 73% of their communication attempts. Emotional resonance indicators are strengthening," Kira added, her luminescent markings shifting through patterns that reflected both concentration and excitement as her empathic abilities processed the alien consciousness they were slowly learning to understand. "Alex, they're expressing something that translates roughly as gratitude mixed with relief. As if they've been trying to communicate with someone for a very long time." The breakthrough had come 3 days earlier when Alex's technical analysis of signal characteristics had combined with Kira's intuitive understanding of communication intent to reveal that the resonance used quantum field fluctuations to convey emotional content while embedding logical information in harmonic patterns that operated across multiple dimensional frequencies simultaneously. "Captain," Alex said, activating the communication link to the bridge, "we're ready to attempt direct response transmission using the hybrid protocol we've developed." "Proceed, Commander Harper," came Captain Rodriguez's voice, carrying the kind of controlled excitement that marked potentially historic moments. "Dr. Solanas, what's your assessment of their emotional state regarding contact attempts?" "Cautiously optimistic," Kira replied, her enhanced empathy providing insights that purely technical analysis couldn't match. "They seem to understand that we're trying to communicate rather than simply analyzing their signals, and they're adjusting their transmission patterns to accommodate our technological limitations." Alex began the carefully calibrated response sequence that represented months of collaborative development, technical precision guided by empathic understanding to create communication that honored both human engineering capabilities and resonance consciousness patterns. As the transmission propagated through the quantum field generators they'd modified for interdimensional communication, both he and Kira monitored the feedback with the kind of focused attention that had made their partnership invaluable. "Response incoming," Alex announced, watching his displays register communication attempts that were unmistakably intentional and surprisingly complex. They're trying to teach us their language protocols in real time." More than that, Kira said, her luminescent markings brightening with patterns that Alex had learned indicated profound emotional movement. Alex, they're sharing cultural information. Art, philosophy, mathematical concepts that exist outside three-dimensional space. This isn't just first contact, it's first contact with beings whose entire civilization operates according to principles we've never encountered. Over the following hours, their communication with the resonance evolved from basic signal exchange to genuine cultural dialogue, with Alex's systematic approach to information processing providing framework for understanding concepts that Kira's empathic sensitivity detected but couldn't initially categorize. The resonance, in turn, proved remarkably adept at adapting their communication methods to accommodate human cognitive limitations while sharing perspectives that expanded both their understanding of the universe. Captain Rodriguez to all senior staff, came the announcement that interrupted their latest translation session. Priority briefing in Conference Room Alpha. Dr. Solanas and Commander Harper, please prepare to present your findings to Starfleet Command via subspace communication. As they prepared for the briefing that would establish their first contact protocols as the foundation for future human-resonance relations, Alex found himself reflecting on how dramatically his life had changed since his accidental confession in the ship's corridor. Kira, he said as they organized their research data for presentation, do you remember what you told me about honest accidents revealing feelings that were ready to be shared? I remember, she replied, her smile carrying the kind of warmth that made her luminescent markings glow with contentment. Are you thinking about how your corridor observation led to all of this? I'm thinking about how what started as personal embarrassment about accidentally voicing private thoughts has led to professional partnership that's changed both our careers and potentially influenced humanity's approach to interspecies communication. And personal partnership that's changed both our lives in ways that have nothing to do with professional achievements, Kira added, moving closer with the kind of natural intimacy that had developed as their relationship deepened alongside their collaborative work. Any regrets about how we met? Alex asked, echoing conversations they'd had during the early stages of their relationship when both were still uncertain about mixing personal and professional connections. My only regret is that it took your accidental honesty to create the opportunity for direct conversation, Kira replied. Though I suppose the dramatic circumstances made for better development of trust and communication skills than conventional relationship progression might have provided. And better compatibility testing, Alex agreed. Most couples don't discover how well they work together under pressure until after they've made permanent commitments. Speaking of commitments, Kira said, her luminescent markings shifting to patterns that Alex had learned indicated nervousness mixed with hopeful anticipation, there's something I want to discuss with you after we finish presenting our findings to Starfleet Command. Good something or concerning something? Life-changing something, she replied with a smile that made him understand why he'd been compelled to whisper about her beauty in the first place. But let's successfully establish humanity's first quantum harmonic communication protocols before we discuss personal future planning. The briefing with Starfleet Command proved to be a validation of everything they developed during their months of collaborative work. Their integrated approach to communication analysis was officially adopted as standard procedure for future first contact situations, while their successful translation of resonance cultural concepts established new frameworks for understanding non-corporeal intelligence throughout the Federation. Commander Harper, Dr. Solanas, Admiral Chen said via subspace communication, your joint analysis has produced the most significant advancement in interspecies communication theory since the development of universal translation matrices. Starfleet Command is prepared to offer you permanent partnership assignments for future first contact missions, with joint authority over communication protocols and cultural analysis. Admiral, Alex replied, we'd be honored to accept those assignments, assuming our personal relationship doesn't create conflicts of interest with professional collaboration. On the contrary, Admiral Chen responded with obvious approval, your personal partnership appears to enhance rather than compromise your professional effectiveness. Starfleet has no objection to married couples serving together when their collaboration produces results of this caliber. Alex felt his heart rate spike as he processed the Admiral's casual reference to marriage, while Kira's luminescent markings brightened with patterns that suggested the same surprise mixed with excitement that was currently disrupting his ability to form coherent responses. Admiral, Kira said with diplomatic grace that covered for Alex's momentary speechlessness, "We appreciate your confidence in our partnership, both professional and personal. We'll certainly consider how best to structure our service to Starfleet while honoring our commitment to each other." After the communication ended and they were alone in the briefing room, Alex turned to Kira with growing understanding of what she'd wanted to discuss about life-changing decisions and personal future planning. "So," he said, "when you mentioned wanting to discuss commitments after our presentation, I was planning to suggest that our professional partnership has proven successful enough that we should consider making our personal partnership equally official," Kira replied, her smile brightening her luminescent markings in ways that transformed her striking appearance into something approaching radiant joy. "Though Admiral Chen seems to have assumed we were already planning in that direction." "Kira Solanas," Alex said, taking her hands while the magnitude of what they were discussing settled into certainty that felt both thrilling and completely natural, "will you marry me?" "Alex Harper," she replied, her luminescent markings settling into patterns that conveyed deep contentment mixed with excited anticipation. "I've been hoping you would ask that question for months." "Yes, I will absolutely marry you." As they celebrated their engagement in the same briefing room where they just established protocols for humanity's first quantum harmonic communication, Alex realized that his whispered observation about Kira's beauty had indeed changed everything, not just by creating the opportunity for personal relationship, but by leading to professional collaboration that had influenced interspecies communication throughout the Federation while providing foundation for the kind of meaningful partnership he'd never imagined was possible. The most beautiful woman he'd ever seen had turned to face him when she heard his private comment, and in doing so had initiated a conversation that led to love, marriage, and careers dedicated to building bridges between species that had never learned to understand each other. Sometimes, Alex reflected, the most important changes in the universe really did begin with honest accidents that revealed feelings people didn't realize they were ready to share. And sometimes, those accidents led to exactly the kind of future that made every moment of initial embarrassment worth experiencing for the joy of discovering what became possible when two people decided to build something together that neither could have achieved alone.